May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. We have what I think are some kind of puzzling stories today, with people going up on mountains and then being engulfed in glory and shining and terrifying the people around them. And really the question is, what is the point of all of this power? What is the point of the glory? What do God's glory and power have to say to us in our day and in our time? Well, let's start with the gospel story. Jesus goes up on the mountain to pray, as he often does, and as he is praying, two men appear, Elijah and Moses. Now, Moses and Elijah represent the Hebrew tradition. With Moses, we have the representation of the law, and with Elijah, the prophets, the two things that have made up the religion that Jesus comes out of, the religion that has shaped him and that continues to nourish him. And often we start thinking of the law in really negative ways. Christians tend to think of the law as something punishing, something that limits us, something that is deadening. But really, the coming of the covenant, these commandments coming down to the people of Israel, this is the end of the story of the Exodus. The story begins with the freeing of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, and then they are brought into a life-giving, liberating covenant with God. This is ultimate freedom, the freedom to be known by and loved by and in relationship with the God of liberation. So really, the law for the Hebrew people and for observant Jews today is a symbol of freedom. It's a symbol of the Exodus and the final capitulation of the Exodus, what it was pointing to bring them into loving relationship with God. And Elijah, the prophets are constantly trying to call God's people out of spiritual bondage, out of literal bondage, and into freedom. This two together, the law and the prophets, represent the story of God's constant quest to bring God's people out of bondage and into freedom and into liberating relationship with God. So it's interesting that Luke is the only one of all the different places where we get this story in the Bible that tells us what Elijah and Moses talked about with Jesus. We get this story in other places, but we never know what they're talking about. And most translations don't say his departure, they say his exodus. And the Greek really points to the exodus. That's an important detail, as is the fact that Moses is there with them. And it helps us to see Jesus' journey not just as death and resurrection, but as a journey of liberation. That Jesus has also come to bring liberation to God's people, liberation from those things that literally oppress us, that are literal slavery for people, that are literal death and destruction, as well as those things that spiritually oppress us, those things that capture our hearts and lead us toward destruction of ourselves and others. Jesus has come and is a part of the second Exodus. So, what about all of this glory? They're up on top of the mountains, and they start glowing, and they shine, and it's powerful. But what do? They come back down off of the mountain. They don't hoard all of that glory for themselves. They don't use it as a way to browbeat people into following them. They don't use it as a way to self-aggrandize or to bring more power to themselves. Instead, they use that power and that glory on behalf of liberation. Moses comes down with the covenant and invites his people into this liberating relationship with God. And Jesus begins his journey into Jerusalem, a journey that leads to him laying down his life for the sake of liberation, for the sake of bringing life and freedom to all people. That is what that glory is meant for. So I was trying to think about, okay, what's a modern day example or equivalent or symbol of this? And sometimes Facebook can be useful. Usually I use it as a really not useful distraction. But occasionally when you're skimming it, you come across useful things for your sermon. And I came across an art movement called Icons on Ammo Boxes. It comes out of Ukraine. Now, icons are images that are meant to connect the earthly with the divine. In Orthodox religion, they are used as a symbol or as almost a window to heaven. So you contemplate an image of a saint or of Christ, and through the earthly materials, the earthly image, you are connected to God's glory, and you pray, and it is sort of a window to heaven for your soul and for your spirit. But this movement takes it even a little bit further. The icons are painted on ammo boxes that were brought from the front lines of the war in Ukraine. I want to show you an image of some of these icons and read one news story about it. These ammo boxes, taken directly from the Eastern Front, have been hand-painted with care by Alexander Klimenko and Sofia Atlantova. Harkening back to work of the Byzantine masters, the beautiful Christian icons that adorn the wooden planks remind us of the hope and healing that is possible in the face of suffering. People weaponize religion and icons. We try to convert symbols of life, of death, to the symbols of life, explained Klimenko. But the icons represent more than the symbols of hope for reconciliation and efforts to bring peace and justice to Ukraine. Because the sales of these works of art go directly to the Pirogov First Volunteer Mobile Hospital, a non-government effort that brings civilian doctors and medics to the war zone. It is important that the victory of life over death occurs not only at the figurative and symbolic level, but also in reality, states the hospital's website, where icons are available for purchase. Where there is pain and violence, the icons bring salvation and relief, explains the artist. We transform death to life by helping the hospitals. In these icons, we see the glory of God come to be right in the midst of suffering and violence, painted right onto images, boxes that have held weapons of death and destruction. We see suffering transformed into hope. We see God's glory shining even in spaces that are most desperately in need of it. We are called to be like those icons. We are called to take the glory of God, the power and hope of heaven, even into spaces of war and death and destruction. But the good news is we do not do it alone. This week, we begin Lent on Wednesday. And for 40 days, we journey with Jesus to the cross. During Lent, we remember that this world is still captive to death, to suffering, to systems that lead to violence and poverty and slavery and despair. But we go on this Lenten journey because we know that Christ's labor of love is for the sake of liberation. Ours and the world's. We are still in the midst of an exodus. And just as Moses' people found themselves free to love and be loved by the God of liberation, by the God of hope, so we too can rejoice that we are free to love and be loved and participate with Christ in this journey toward liberation and hope. A hope that Christ has died and risen to bring to you and to me and to our world, no matter how much despair it seems like there might be. The end of the story is always liberation. The end of the story is always life and resurrection. Amen.